Welcome back guys to the 2D platformer tutorial series. In this one, we're going to create some animations for the player and switch between them in the player script. I found some assets on itch.io. This is an asset pack called Fantasy Knight Free Pixel Art Animated Character. I'm going to put the link in the description. It is a very cool asset pack of this pixel art knight that has a ton of animations that we can use to create a cool platformer character. Download this, and when you do, you're going to get the files and they're going to look like this. There are two different color options. I'm just going to pick the first one. It doesn't really matter. And in here again we have an outlined and no outline version. I'm going to pick the outlined version, but feel free to use the other one. In here we have the PNG sprite sheets, and like I said, we have a ton of different animations here. In this video we're going to use the idle, jump, fall, and the running animations, but in the future we're probably going to pick up some different ones as we implement more functionality, like the wall slide for example. I'm going to pick these and bring them into Godot, but before I do that I'm going to go into my project, go into the project settings, and in the textures tab here under rendering, I'm going to set the default texture filter to be nearest. Because we're going to use pixel art assets, we want to use the nearest texture filter that doesn't really blur the pixels in the texture so that the pixel art looks crisp and nice. Okay, now let's go into our file system, create a new folder here called assets. Let's create one more inside of assets, and that's going to be the textures. And then I'm going to select the textures folder so that when I bring the files in, they immediately go into that folder. I have them selected here. I'm just going to left click, drag them into my project, and they're going to get imported, and I have them here. Now we can go into the player scene, and instead of this Godot icon here, let's turn off the collision shape for now so that we can see it better. We're going to use this idle.png. We're going to switch between these as we try to play different animations, but first we're going to implement the idle animation. You can see that we have some scaling applied from the previous icon settings that we had. We're going to reset that. And also let's set the position to be lined up with the x-axis. We need to go into the animation settings. I think this one has 10 different frames. So inside of the animation settings here, we're going to set the horizontal frames to be 10. And we can see that by default, the player sprite is more in the left side because of the size of this image. So I'm going to go into the move mode, move this guy to the right about 3-4 pixels, and now we can actually start animating him. But if we go back into the world scene, you can see that the player is currently tiny, and that is because these are pixel art assets, so they're supposed to be small. Now we can either go into the player scene and scale this guy up like this, for example, so that the player looks bigger, or we can just change the window settings to be really small, which is what I'm going to do. So let's set the scale back to be 1, and let's go into the project settings, to the window settings, and we're going to set the viewport width to be 320 and the height to be 180. We're also going to set the stretch mode to be canvas items. This is going to make sure that the window scales up everything that we have when we make it bigger. Okay, so as you can see, the viewport is much smaller, so we can take the player in there. We need to save it here in the scene so that the scale change takes effect. And I'm gonna also bring in the platforms. They are too big at the moment. Let's delete the second one, and let's change the size of the first one. Let's go into the mesh and make this much smaller, like this. Let's do the same thing for the collision shape. Okay, looking good. Let's put this at the bottom, and let's duplicate this and put the second one here so we have the same setup. And I also want to go into the player and push the camera a little bit down right at the top of the player's head. Now we can play the game, and you can see that everything is looking good with the pixel art. And actually, I think I have a setting that I want to show you already taking effect. If you turn on advanced settings here, you'll get this window with override. I already have this set because I was testing, but for you, this isn't going to be set, so it's going to be 0, 0 like this. And if you try to play the game like that, you're gonna get this tiny window, which looks really funny. You can actually scale this up because we have the stretch mode enabled as canvas items, but you don't want to do that each time you try to play the game. So you can go into the window settings, turn on advanced settings, and set the window width override to something larger like 1280 and 720. This is going to make sure that you have the window nice and big at the start and everything is looking good. We can still jump around and do this cool stuff that we were doing in the last lecture. Okay, great. Now we're gonna animate the player. So in the player scene, we're gonna create an animation player. We have two different options actually. We can either use a normal sprite 2D like the one we have here and animate the animations using an animation player, or we can create an animated sprite node. In that case, we're not gonna need an animation player, but I'm gonna go with the animation player because it is going to give us more power in the future. We can do cool stuff like calling functions from a script mid-animation, for example. So because of that, I'm gonna go with the animation player. Let's create a new animation. This is going to be the idle animation. It's going to be auto start because we want this to be the first one that gets played when the player gets instanced. This is also going to loop. Let's zoom out a little here and we're going to click on the sprite 2D. An important thing here is we want to key the texture just like this. And we need to put this at the beginning. We also want to key the horizontal and the vertical frames of the sprite. And that is because we're going to switch between different sprite sheets, different textures here, because all of our animations are in a different PNG. So we want to keep the settings of that PNG when we make the change to a different animation. For example, if the idle animation has 10 frames, if another animation sprite sheet has 5 frames, and if we change to that one and change back to idle, it's going to be left as 5, and then the whole animation is going to look weird. And we also, of course, need to key the frames, all of them. So let's start with the first one, and let's key all of them by clicking here until we get to the end. And I think that's it. Let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, let's run the animation and see what it looks like. You can see that it is a very subtle animation of the night character kind of breathing and just being idle. That's good. Now let's move on to the run animation. I'm going to create a new animation here, call it run. This is also going to loop. Let's key the texture, the horizontal frames. This one also has 10 frames, as you can see. Oh wait, did I even change animations? Images? No. Okay. I almost messed up there. So let's put this guy here and let's key this one. So instead of keying idle, we keyed the run animation. And this one also conveniently has 10 horizontal frames, so we can also key that. That's fine. And let's also key the vertical frames. And finally, let's key all the frames. This one will also have 10. And that's going to be the run animation. Looking okay. And let's also create one more called jump. Let's drag the jump.png into the texture. This one has 3 horizontal frames. So let's key the texture and key the horizontal frames. Let's also key the vertical frames. And we're going to put the length of this animation to be 0.3. And this will also loop. Let's zoom in a little and key the frames 1, 2, and 3. And we can play that and see what it looks like. It's looking okay. It seems a little slow to me, so maybe we can actually make this one 0.5 seconds long, 0.15 seconds long, excuse me. Zoom in a little, put the snap to be 0.05 so that we can scroll in smaller increments. And let's put these frames closer together so that the animation is faster. Okay. We want to do the same thing for the fall animation. Let's create a new one. This guy will also loop and be 0.15 seconds long. Let's click on the sprite, drag in the fold.png, key the texture, horizontal frames. This also has 3 frames like the jump. Let's also key frames. And let's put the snap to be 0.05 again and put these frames closer together, just like that. Play. It seems a little too fast, but we can tweak this later if you don't like it. So those are all the animations that we're gonna use for now. Let's switch back to idle, and you can see that when I switch back to idle, all the texture and the horizontal frames, everything is switched as well, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so that is all for the animation player stuff. Now we're gonna go into the script and implement the switching of the animations. Okay, here we are inside of the player script. First of all, I want to create a reference to the animation player, animation player. We're gonna call this one AP because it is very cumbersome to type animation player each time. Let's also create one for the sprite. And here we're gonna do a bunch of things. First of all, currently, the player by default is looking to the right. We want the player to look towards the left when the player is going to the left, like this. We're a bit too fast right now. I'm actually gonna click on the player and set the speed to be like 200, maybe 150 even. Let's also put the gravity down a little and put the jump force also down to be 500. We can tweak these later furthermore when we're trying to make something nice, but I think this is going to be better for testing purposes so that we don't run out of platform. Okay, so when the player is going to the left like this, I want the sprite to be flipped. And the sprite has a very convenient feature. If you click on it, underneath the offset here, there's a flip H boolean. And if you turn this on, the sprite is flipped horizontally, basically. So we want to do this from the script when the player is going to the left. Okay, luckily, we already know the horizontal direction. It is this variable right here. This can either be -1, 0, or 1. And we know that when it is -1, that means that the player is going to the left. So we can basically say sprite.flip horizontal equals horizontal direction is equal to -1. So this expression right here will resolve to a Boolean value, a true or a false value. And if the horizontal direction is -1, this will be true. If not, this will be false. So when the player is going to the left, we're going to set the flip H of the sprite to be true. So that it looks like this. As you can see, we're going to the left and the sprite is flipped. The problem is, as soon as I let go, the player is flipped again back to be the normal state. But we don't want that. We want the flip horizontal to be persistent. If the player is going to the left and we take our hands off, we want the player to still look at the left. How do we do that? We simply need to do a check here before we set the sprite flip horizontal value. We're going to say if horizontal direction is not equal to 0, let's do this. This means if the horizontal direction is 0, we're not going to do anything about the flip horizontal, which means when the player is going to the left and we take our hands off the key, the horizontal direction is going to be 0 and we're not going to change the flip H here. Okay, let's see this in action. Go to the right, go to the left, take my hands off, and you can see that the player is still looking to the left. Okay, so that's the first problem solved, and now we're going to switch between animations. Currently, we're playing the idle animation because we set that as autoplay, but we want to create a more sophisticated system here. So I'm going to create a new function down here called update animations, and this will take in the horizontal direction. And we're going to call this at the end of physics process and pass in the horizontal direction that we calculated. So here we have two different main cases. The first one is when the player is on the floor. The second one is when the player is in air, basically. So when on the floor, we want to play either the idle animation or the run animation. On the floor, in mid-air, we either want to play jump or fall. So we can create a simple if statement here saying if is on floor else. If we're on the floor, we're gonna say if horizontal direction is 0, this means we're not moving, so we're just gonna say ap.play idle, so we're gonna play the idle animation, else we're gonna say ap.play run. Simple. Let's see. So when the player isn't moving, we're playing idle, and when the player is moving, we're playing the run animation. Okay, that seems to be working. Let's move on to the second case, which is when the player is not on the floor. In that case, we can basically check the velocity.y value, because we know that when the y velocity is negative, the player is jumping, going up, and when the y velocity is positive, the player is falling. So we're going to say if velocity.y is less than 0, we're going to play jump, else if velocity.y is greater than 0, we're going to say ap.play fall. And now, when the player is falling, we're playing the fall animation, and when the player is jumping, we're playing the jump animation, and it is a little bit too fast, I think, the animation, but we can fix that later. Okay, I also want to go into my camera here and maybe zoom out a little, because currently we're too zoomed in, I feel like, and I'm gonna move it a little bit down as well, maybe 10 pixels like that, and let's set the zoom to be 0.65 maybe. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think this looks nicer. Ooh, okay. Maybe the collision shape is a little bit too large. Did we forgot to fix that? Yes, we did. Okay. Let's make this much smaller, like this. Maybe like that. Okay. Before we end the lecture, there's one final thing that we need to fix, and that is the sprite. When it is flipped, half of the player is outside of the collision shape. This is because we moved the sprite 4 pixels to the right, because the default sprite isn't really centered on the y-axis. So to fix this, we moved them 4 pixels to the right so that it looks nicer and in line with the collision shape. But like I said, with this setup, when we flip horizontally, half of the player is outside of the collision shape, and it is not at all aligned with the center line as well, which is problematic. We can really see this take effect if you turn on debug visible collision shapes and play the game. You can see that when we're going to the right, everything is fine, but as soon as we turn left, half the player is outside of the collision shape, and we get funny stuff like this, where the player just falls down, and the arm of the player is inside of the platform there. To fix this, we basically want to move the player's sprite to the left side when the flip H is turned on. So when it is turned on, instead of putting it at 4, we want to put it at -4 so that it also looks correct. This seems to be the same for each one of the sprite sheets, so we can safely set this back to be 4 and flip horizontal to be off. So we can safely go into our script and create a function called switch direction. And instead of doing the flip horizontal here, we're just going to call switch direction. Before we had the sprite.fliph equals horizontal direction equals -1 here. This is what we had before. We're not going to do this anymore. We're going to call switch direction. And in here, we're going to do that. And then we're going to say sprite.position.x equals horizontal direction times 4, so that when we're going to the left, the position is -4, and when we're going to the right, the position is +4. Okay, let's see this in action. I'm gonna play the game, and as you can see, the sprite is in the correct spot when we go to the right or to the left. Okay guys, great. So that is going to be it for this lecture. We have all the animations that we initially want for the player configured in the animation player. We're also switching between them in the player script. Great stuff. Thank you so much for watching the video. It means a lot to me. I hope that you learned something new. In my YouTube tutorials, I tend to go a little bit fast and skip explaining the basics. If you don't know anything about Godot or you're just a beginner, I've actually spent 3 months making a complete course teaching everything that you need to know about Godot in order to start making your own games. If that's interesting to you, check the link in the description. If not, it's okay. You can enjoy the free content that I have on this channel. They will always be free, and I'll keep making more because I want to help people regardless of if they buy a course from me or not. Like I said, thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the next video.